Here we are. You see the presentation now, right?
Yes.
Brilliant. So our highlight for the World Cancer Day this year, 2023, is to talk about patient-oncologist communication. Just as a background, I have published through Fadia Survive and Thrive an abstract with the Advanced Breast Cancer Consensus Conference in one of the previous years, prior to COVID, obviously. And then I was in a part of a panel discussing the conversation between patients and oncologists. So this is, you can consider it as a continuation of that work. So we're going to cover three main issues related to the communication between patients and oncologists. And again, I am going to focus on the perspective of patients and patient advocates and loved ones. And then Dr. Ali Shar will thankfully be responsible of the oncologist side, presenting them, and then we'll open it up for questions for everyone. So I'll first of all, I will discuss the patients and in a broader sense, the families or caregivers, loved ones' needs. And then we will move into what are the identified conversation and communication gaps that exist, considering many things and considering the different expectations and different communication levels, as we will discuss. And last thing is about bridging these gaps of communication for productive results in conversation or communication. So with this, let's start with the first pillar, which is about the patient needs. In order to discuss any needs related to cancer, cancer is a complex disease. And this complexity, let's agree that it will never go away. But managing it and the communication about it, this is what we can improve. This improvement in communication and everything related to cancer can be done in the four typical steps or pillars of cancer control around the world. It's not only in one country. Starting with prevention and then early detection and diagnosis as a phase. And then the third would be treatment and towards the end of life, palliative care. Although there are many ideas about palliative care should start from the very beginning in terms of pain management, not palliative care as we define it as the fourth pillar of cancer control. So in all these phases, communication is essential. And there are many gaps that exist, but I am going to discuss this in more details in a few minutes from now. One of the most important needs are related to proactively, and I'm emphasizing the word proactively, addressing the side effects. It doesn't help patients to say, this what you need to do, and there's no other alternative for this treatment, and then they are left alone with the side effects that can be very huge, as the picture suggests. And I'm not saying that this is the current situation, but it used to be like that 10 or 14 years ago when I first started. It is left to the judgment and the education and the communication skills of the oncologist to well inform patients about what they expect from treatment and how to address these side effects if they are reported by the patients. If they are not reported, and they manage them at home or from their side without reporting them, that's another issue, by the way. But what I'm trying to say that there are huge pains related to side effects from treatment, and these need to be addressed proactively, which I have seen, like any other patient advocate, this changed over the last 5 to 10 years. Now, for aggressive treatments like chemotherapies, anti-vomiting and anti-diarrhea is given upfront, not like it used to be before. So the other things related not only to the treatment and the medical side, it's related to what we call the quality of life aspects of the patient. Their needs in terms of nutrition, their needs of water intake, sleeping hours, and need to be informed about what can, given their new normal, being a cancer patient, what can be done to increase their energy level, to increase their overall wellness, perceived wellness. So there are many things that these are identified as their needs, besides proactively addressing the side effects. So moving to the second segment of this seminar or forum, conversation or communication gaps. Given these needs, what are the communication gaps that might exist between patients and oncologists? Well, according to the research I indicated as we start this forum, that there was a research and there were 4 or maybe more communication gaps that were identified. I'm going to highlight here, for the sake of time, 3 main gaps, starting with the power gap, then attention gap, and lastly, advice gap. If we start with the power gap, it is well known that oncologists, because we are talking about 2 sides of a communication, right? If I am in my own professional world and I am asking participants in a training course of communication, if you are the sender and receiver, who bears the responsibility of the communication? The receiver would say the sender, and the sender would say the communicator. And if there are more smartest people in the room, would say both, the sender and the receiver. My answer is always identical, which is me. I do. Me indicates that if you are the sender, it's your responsibility. If you are the receiver, it's your responsibility, because we can control ourselves. We cannot control the others. It's very simple. So if I am giving the analogy in the communication between patients and oncologists, we need to identify this gap, not to play a hot potato game, like who bears the responsibility or whose fault is this. It's just to highlight facts, evidence-based, based on the literature and research and observations and what actually patients are going through, and equally oncologists. So we can shed the light on these gaps, so in the purpose of furthering the communication, not to pinpoint any lack of responsibility or who bears the responsibility. So I needed to emphasize this before getting started. So in the power gap, oncologists classically hold more than 100% of the information related to the cancer. Let's face that fact. They treat hundreds, tens, thousands of cases, depending on the practice, whether it's in the government or otherwise. And then on the other hand, you have a patient who face the cancer or get diagnosed with cancer, either primary or metastatic, for the first time in their whole life. So for them is the one and only case. And their information is near zero if they are outside the medical establishment and outside the awareness bubble. I call it a bubble because especially in the Middle East where I'm based, it's not far ago that cancer never was pronounced in the native language, and it was called the evil disease instead. So there are many misconceptions, and that feeds into the power gap. So, and it's also a game in a sense that it involves 2 parties and it's very dynamic. So just to summarize it, the whole information are with the oncologist, and minimum near to zero information on average with the patient. And as a result, they can ask what is perceived to be naive questions, simple questions very early, and it can take from the time of the oncologist for understandable reasons. So this power gap can be elevated, as we will see at the last part here, through free sharing of information between oncologists and patients. It doesn't help if the patients go in their own and seek information, whether they are credible and reliable or not. It will be, for me, it's a triple problem. And instead of simple awareness, it will be deleting the misinformation and then starting over. So that's the power gap in short. The second gap exists in attention. So also because of the information that are at the grasp of the oncologist, the attention gap is like it's the opposite. The patients, because they are, it's first time they are facing this I call it new normal or disease, what happens that they are fully and undivided attention would be with their oncologist. Although some research shown that in the first appointment between cancer patient and oncologist, 60% of the information will be evaporated, or there will be a lack of focus, because it's like very heavy life-threatening issues that are discussed. Yet the attention in the long term is huge from the patient side, and for oncologists it's another patient. So I wouldn't say that they don't give attention to the patients, but it's a normal patient, normal attention, which is humanly possible to give. And by pinpointing to this gap, I'm not asking any oncologist to increase their attention. In contrary, because if they give more attention and become emotionally involved with patients, that would cloud their judgment. So you can see here the dilemma. What would be the best level of attention as oncologists to give to your patient, knowing that they are milking every single gesture, information that you give. One of the interesting conversation I had with a long old established oncologist. We met in Portugal in one of the ABC conferences. Because she's aging, she has some wrinkles in her face. So she told me that she had to go to the plastic surgeon to undo one of the wrinkles here, because when she wears the glasses, reading the PET scan for her patients, they say, "What? Is it a bad news? Why you are frowning?" She said, "I'm not frowning. It's just like normal wrinkles in my face." So this was an obvious example how patients give full attention to the gesture, to the words, and even non-verbal body language that oncologists send to them, knowing that they send these signals or not. They are the same, because patients still grasp all that attention. And lastly is the advice gap. We are living in an era where social media, broadcasting millions of information. I don't have exact statistics, but at least if we take it fair, 50% are correct, 50% are wrong. And about cancer, there are zillions of informations. So advice gap actually talks about how patients try to inform themselves independently, and most of the time not evidence-based, about new treatments, clinical trials, which is in the traditional oncology, or in equally in what is called integrative oncology or alternative oncology, where they seek herbal and plant-based sort of treatments, or even anything outside what is approved by the authorities regulating anti-cancer drug development, right? So with all these information, patients would like to have a reference, a benchmark, a credible source that they can cross-check what they came to know, no matter how they came to know about these new treatments, from the oncologist. So that's a stress communication gap, because it's the advice gap, as it's called, because we look always as patients or loved one to the oncologist as the final reference. Is this correct or not? And if the oncologists themselves are not well informed about these new developments, they will be in a position of a lack of communication, or not willingly providing what is perceived by patients as very important advice. So with this section, we finished mostly the two-thirds of the presentation before we open it up for the questions by the oncologists first and then the audience. But we have spent the remaining like 10 minutes at least on discussing how to bridge the gaps, because that's our aim from highlighting this in the World Cancer Day. So first and foremost, to bridge the gap, I know that I said if you are sender or receiver, it's your responsibility, but it's a shared responsibility basically. In cancer, we all share responsibilities, all parties, patient, loved ones, caregivers, nurses, oncologists, pharma companies, regulators, to name a few, and associations like the UICC and ABC. I don't like to miss any entities, but it's really by large a shared responsibility to bridge this communication. And for the next 3 years, theme of the World Cancer Day is about closing the care gap. And what comes to mind first in closing the care gap is always about material things, which is the financial care gap. Some countries have more accessibility than others. But if we think about the most simple things to do is communication and its prevention from complications. That's what we can do in closing the care gap. At least that's our focus in Fadia Survive and Thrive for this year. And that would happen by having open conversation and get aside our egos, all of us, when we are going to address these, I would call them the gaps of communication, either power or advice or even anything related to information gap. So to understand this in an interesting analogy, if we think about oncologists that they are looking through glasses, which is science-based glasses of oncology, and the patients look into through the glasses that is colored by the patient's needs. If we start on the right side, the oncologist side, what they see are progression-free survival. These are the norms in any research, clinical trial, or treatment, or even guidelines. Tolerable side effects according to research and evidence. And what is tolerable is very vague concept. It's maybe very known to drug developers or oncologists, but it's very vague in terms of how patients perceive it, because some of them say like, okay, the tolerability was good for 70%, but I am feeling miserable with this treatment. So it's not tolerable in terms of this word. And then the guidelines dictate the next line of treatment in terms of, especially if we are talking about metastatic or advanced cases of cancer, the guidelines dictate what should be used next in the different alternatives of treatments or anti-cancer agents available. And then physical pain management is the focus, at least in 90% of the cases, by the medical treatment when it comes to any pain related to cancer. Now, if we look into the glasses of the patients, how they see the whole picture, every single point of that is seen in different lenses. So it can be seen as real world tolerable side effects. So in terms of, I don't care at some point as a patient or caregivers about what the research say or what even the leaflet of the tablet or the treatment says. What I feel is the real thing, is the real deal. So what are the real world side effects, whether they are tolerable or not, that's a different story. And then comes the need of deciding on one's own destiny. This is a basic decency that is required for most of the patients. And again, I would emphasize in this part of the world and in some developing countries, because back to the information and power gap, it's all about having this information. So the oncologists naturally think that they are in a position to take the decision on behalf of the patients because they have all the information. And by the way, my background has a big component of decision making. So it's all about being well informed about your alternatives to be able to take the decision. So instead of supporting the decision making of patients, what happens is like, okay, I know the information, and it's like a fast crawling monster, which we call cancer. So let's take the decision immediately, and it's taken by the oncologist, and the unknown or unspoken assumption that they know the best for the patients, which is, I am not going to argue that there will be different purposes. Like at the end of the day, we need to treat the patients, but patients are independent decent people that they need to take their own decisions. And as such, our role would be to support their decision making with all possible information that we know. If I am to take the step or talking on behalf of oncologists, but that will be your role, Dr. Alishar, to talk about the oncologist view. The hope of getting better with decreased pain is one of the huge needs, and also the needs to address all types of pain, not only the physical one, but emotional and the ones related to anxiety about the future and uncertainty are some of the few examples of the pain that need to be managed in the eyes of patients. So this just to give you a quick idea about the differences, because emphasizing these would emphasize how we can bridge the gap that exists. So one of the things that can bridge the gap in communication, communication gaps are related to the quality of life. So the expectations of the quality of life, that energy level, going about handling things and going about life without being in miserable condition. Like my regrets to mention extreme examples, but it will be a very miserable life if the patients spend 50% of their time between the toilet and the bed because of lack of energy and the side effects of diarrhea and vomiting, right? So this is just one extreme example, but taking care of their nutrition, and that's a big line of science. It's not outside the traditional oncology, and I think the American Association of Clinical Oncology highlighted that a year or two before COVID. So we're talking about 4 years ago. They recognized integrative oncology as something that they need to be the theme of focus besides the guidelines. So it's something that is endorsed by clinical and medical professional associations because it helps. Every little thing helps. It's not like what we used to think in the past that this is the monster, which is cancer. Let's take care of it, and it's acceptable casualty to compromise other aspects of the quality of life. The other thing related to bridging the complications conversation gap or communication gap between patients and oncologists. So one of the things we did in Fadia Survive and Thrive is to take initiatives related to different patient groups. So at some point we were advocating in one of the years at the World Cancer Day for critically ill cancer patients, and last year was for elderly patients with cancer. And I have to say, in both these groups of patients, in adult cancer, there are many complications that unfortunately can be avoided. And I'm saying unfortunately because complications such as sepsis, for example, can take lives very much faster than cancer itself. So if there is no awareness about complications and what to expect, and having this magical balance between not horrifying upfront the patient and also not make them reckless about their hygiene and how to go about their treatment, how to find this magical balance between both advices from oncologist to patient is very key, because many casualties could have been prevented if this awareness or conversation is made upfront before getting to a level that there is no return. And it's not a surprise in the cancer setting. Again, something like sepsis, and I'm giving this example because there are many global alliances related to sepsis because it takes life in every single disease, not only cancer. But in cancer, we can see that patients are more vulnerable because it's an immunosuppressor disease. The very reason they have cancer, that they have compromised immune system. And the anti-cancer agents contribute or make this situation even worse, suppress immune. So it's not a surprise to be more prone to infections. And in metastatic setting, there is a huge risk of getting sepsis, and I would call it a multiple risk, because maybe between 60 to 80% of the symptoms of advanced anti-cancer drugs are similar to sepsis symptoms. So at the time, caregivers or patients say like, it's okay to have diarrhea, it's okay to have a lack of appetite and lack of sleeping and vomiting during this new anti-cancer drug. At the time, these are the very symptoms that they got infection, which is unchecked, and it turned into sepsis. And they are feeling shivering or fever besides these side effects. So you can tell it would mean life and death just when it reached that point. Identifying these early symptoms of sepsis in cancer patients can really save their lives, because once they got into sepsis case, it's a done deal by all research and observations. So that's related to complications. Let's conclude by saying that it's really the communication between patients and oncologists. It's a journey, not a destination. So our purpose is not to reach the end together. It's to be friends, to be good buddies in this journey as patients and oncologists. And I would conclude with this thought for oncologists joining today, and also for patients, just to observe how they feel. Asking simple questions would be enough to bridge such gaps, such as, did I give the information necessary for the patient to take the decisions? Am I giving them the opportunity to take decisions about their treatment lines and actually their life? How do I feel as, like, if oncologists asking themselves, how would I feel about someone taking decisions on my behalf, or how would it feel to be a patient? If just we empathize a little, and that's again not to say that they are not empathizing, it's just simple questions that highlight the ideas of the gaps that exist, and empathize more with it. Because I recognize, like all patient advocates, that we don't need to cloud the judgment of oncologists. It's not an easy disease, and again, the complexity of cancer will never go away, but how we treat each other is what would make all the difference. According to research, most of the complaints from patients about their treating doctors were related to communication, not guideline, treatment protocols, or anything that is physical. At the end of the day is how you communicate with them. So let me conclude here and open it up for how Dr. Alishar would represent the oncologists, and then before we open it up for any questions you may have in your time, in your mind, given the time remaining.
Thank you so
And
much.
I'll stop sharing so we can all see each other.
Very interesting presentation, and it's really interesting to hear the opinion of patient advocate and the patient side. From the perspective of oncologist, I tell that the main problem during the daily activity of oncologist is the lack of time. So if you have a lot of patients and you should make the clinical decision about the patients, and sometimes you do not have time to talk with him. But in our country, the oncologist is like became like a relative to the patient, because we do not have a psychologist who will deal with spiritual problems of patients. So mostly patients like to have advice from oncologists, not only due to the treatment plan, but also about the life. So mostly patients I mean would not like to hear about the cancer at first. So Rania, I would like to ask you if you are here. So
I am, but I was just trying to minimize the background noise.
Oh, it's okay. So you can switch on your microphone, because it's easy for me. So,
oh, it's okay.
You told about we need the patients. We need patients to make the decision. But maybe the first decision in our country, or maybe in some developing country where the mentality of patients may be some lower, the first one, would the patients want to know about the condition, about the treatment, about etc. So sometimes patients would not like to know, they're afraid, and they want somebody to make the decision by their own.
That's very true.
Yeah, that's
Actually,
why the conversation between the oncologist and patients depends on many things. I mean,
true.
cultural level, mentality, etc. So the patients who have high intellectual level, we can discuss with them about the problem in open way. But if the patient cannot imagine or do not know ordinary things about his own organism, I think sometimes it can deteriorate the quality of life, because he will start to think a lot about the condition and
Yeah.
maybe we will decrease his quality of life. And it was very interesting to hear that you talked about the quality of life. I think it's a very important issue for each person has their own priorities, and the priorities of patient can be different from the priority of doctor. Just
Yeah.
maybe
Absolutely.
I would not like to if I have some, for example, sarcoma of my hand, I would not like my hand to be cut, and I'm ready to live uh, much more shorter life, but with my hand. Yeah, but
I
most,
appreciate you sharing that.
yeah, but most professional organization in the world uh, tells that the first issue of the effectiveness of treatment is the length of life. I mean, progression-free survival, overall survival.
Progression free and overall survival.
Organization,
Yes.
only several organizations talk about the overall survival, progression-free survival, plus
Yeah.
quality of life. Not
True.
all.
True.
But
True. This
as
is
I told before, the priority of patients is different. So we always should think about it.
that's so true, and I'm so glad that you raised this point, because when we present these broader, I would say broader ideas, it's very easy for us to get into the bias of generalization. So I'm talking about these gaps of information and power in its broader sense, in the bigger picture. But as you rightly said, and I have met these different types of patients, some of them, especially elderly or not even related to age, related to personality, they don't want to know as a fact what's happening, because if they know some personalities, if they know for a fact that this exists, their personality is to overthink, and as you rightly said, it can have a toll in their actually perceived quality of life. This is a terminal disease, I'm going to die anyway. What's the that what they can think. And actually these type of thoughts are very normal, even get the cancer aside. When we are talking about stress management classes, if someone say like what is the worth of trying, everyone is looking at me, I'm a loser anyway, like these sort of thoughts that make people stressed, they are equally, we are talking about cancer patients, there are many variations in them, and I recognize that some of them indeed they don't want these I would call them like straightforward evidence-based information that can have a horrible impact on their emotional health and on different aspects of life. But when I talk about the information gap or the power gap of information is related to the alternatives of treatment. And that's also is different between a patient and another. Like if we're maybe the obvious example would be about metastatic patients. If they have to choose between two anti-cancer agent drug, and I'm not going to say specific names for the sake of being objective. One is causing huge side effects, and the other is less side effects, but according to research, it will survive them progression-free survival, because we need to have also objective measurement. It will be for 4 months, as opposed to the aggressive one will survive them for 9 months up to a year. So these sort of decisions, it need to be made by the patients. They need to know if they would suffer a little, that would be longer. I'm just giving you an example on the top of my head, but what I'm trying to say that we need to support their decision making, not to tell them what is the science said, like all these scientific details that can make them in a fear state. Just the minimum for them to understand that this is for their best, and these are the alternatives, and I would recommend this as the best choice. And also information related to nutrition, it's a big and that's related to advice gap actually. If the patients are connected everywhere, they are themselves surfing in these social media. I sometimes tell some friends that not because someone posted a video that it's a pure science. Like now people seeing videos and perceive them as a done deal. This is like a pure science. It's a fact for anyone to broadcast himself in a video. They in certain social and educational circles, they would perceive it as the truth, nothing else. Just to be simple. So how to be in a position to share information, not too much, but I recognize again also what you said. Time is our only enemy in this communication gap. Your time as oncologist, patient time and priorities, and what they choose to focus in. So it's not an easy game. It's not an easy issue, the communication, and it's not to be taken for granted or overlooked equally. If we think about it, we will be more careful. Like the example I give about the doctor who went to the plastic surgeon, not to give a false representation that she's frowning.
And the other important issue, as you told, that the prevention. So we need to increase the knowledge within the population about the cancer. So if we will promote the knowledge about the cancer, about the organism, about the function of his organs or other diseases, so it will be easy to talk with him when he will got cancer. No, because I think the knowledge is very important in all for all the people. I mean, during the life, you should gain the knowledge. And I think the most important is the knowledge about your health, not only about the diseases, but how to live in a right way. I mean, what to eat to be healthier, how to make the regime of your day. So as you told, nutrition also important issue, but I tell you that from the point of oncology, to have sleep in the right time, it's also important issue. As you know, the melatonin, which is produced during night period, it stimulated the anti-tumor activity. So, and all our malignant cells, which appear during our daily life, they are killed by our immune system when we are sleeping. But nowadays, we prolong our light day, and we will have more and more cancers because the melatonin cannot be covered when you sleep at the daily life. I think if people know about these simple things and try to follow them, the first, we can gain the decrease of cancer. The second one, we can detect the cancer in early stage, And the third one, if the patient faced with cancer, it's easy to communicate with him like an oncologist. And we also should involve the volunteers, maybe within the medical students, maybe in residents, maybe people who was faced, or some patient advocates, caregivers, etc., to promote the knowledge and to spread it within the population. Right.
That's very well said. Unbelievable that you talk about methylamine, because I was about to say also it's regulate many things, even related to bone growth, and how it's the lack of sleeping is in some research are associated with osteoarthritis and decreasing the bone density, right? So it's everything connected.
Yeah, as you know, during the Nazi, during the World War II, it was very very awful experiments with the people, and it was the deprivation of the sleep. So if the person will not sleep during 5, 6, 7 days, he can die. So it's to sleep. It's more important than to eat. I mean, sometimes.
I wouldn't disagree, but yeah, I don't know if you paid attention when I presented the slide of quality of life. I can share it again, but it's all about sleeping as well. Like it's a multifactorial thing. It's
Yes.
and we shouldn't like choose either or. Let me share just for a few seconds, because it's very important that you say host disabled participants sharing. It's too late to share, right?
But I think you can.
No, it
No?
says like host disabled participant screen sharing. Maybe it's okay if we cannot undo it.
I think I can ask. Азамат, вы можете включить ей демонстрацию, кроме что говорить не получается? Окей.
Oh yes, now it's working. So
Sorry.
let me share that for a second. Yeah, you see the slide?
Yes.
So I'm hovering with my pointer at the top left is smiling, like indicating how being in a state of, I wouldn't call it happiness, because I'm joking about it, always saying happiness is overrated, but just having this sense of smiling, tricking our face that we are happy to be happy. And nutrition related to different colors, the chlorophyll, taking easy enzymes, phytonutrients, and all these beneficial benefits. If you go into the far top right, you will see water and cats and dogs sleeping, not us,
I see.
for a reason. It's just like to indicate how sleeping and being hydrated are extremely important. We are 70% of our body needs to flush any waste when we wake up in the morning, and also to process everything. Our breathing and talking now requires water, plus the nutrients. And sleeping, as you rightly said, like it's important for many things. It's our repair mechanism to undo all the errors that we encounter in our day, whether related to stress, whether related to harmful food or harmful substance, like if it's air pollution or otherwise. So I would say, as you said, sleeping is more important than nutrition if we go to extreme cases, because it's our body mechanism to try to override any errors that we encounter from abusing our food or water intake or stress and all these sort of things. And there are other advices in quality of life related to the timing of the food. Also, in the Middle East culture, we tend to have the last meal just before sleeping. And it's known information, according to studies, that the body cannot repair and digest at the same time, because both are heavy processes. It takes like 4 to 6 hours depending on what type of food. So if someone eat and sleep, the body would most probably be digesting and ignore the repair. So it's not also only about sleeping, it's also about the quality of sleeping. So that's just to share that's when talking about quality of life, it's in its entirety, not just food or de-stressing or sleeping, but it's extremely important. And I can see many of the patients, unfortunately, they report lack of sleep and loss of appetite. So we can just these two examples, like if they are lacking sleeping because of headache and others why and having this poor sense or appetite for food, you can tell that we cannot help them in these two essentials of the quality of life. And in some cases they are caused by the anti-cancer agent. So how to address this problem? It remains unsolved.
So, and I would like to say something about the emotional status. I mean, we talked about the happiness, but I think the main thing in our life is to have some philosophic style of thinking. So in Muslim, we have the definition like a sakina. It's like a calmness. So I think this condition we should strive to it. Right? We should, and the philosophic style of thinking. It's very important to work on yourself in a mental way and spiritual way. And the main thing, if we talk about the patient, is the acceptance of the disease. So the patient should accept the disease, and he also should to take the responsibility about the disease, not only doctors, especially in our countries. Mostly they want doctor to have all the solution about them. So
magical solutions, you have all the answers. Why you are surprised? It goes both ways.
So I think it's really important.
True.
And when the patient will accept the disease and start to fight with the disease, and everybody mortal, I mean, nobody will go out from this life alive. Okay. So
Of course.
we have the death is some natural thing in our life, and the causes of this can be different. So we should accept this, but we should know that cancer is a chronic disease. So it's like a hypertonic disease, maybe some ischemia of the heart. So
Should be
we just
planned
need
or
to
managed as
control
such.
it. If we control it, we will live a long life, but we cannot live
True.
forever.
But it's I have to thank you for raising again these interesting points. To start with the last point you're raising, it's not about living a longer life because again, as patient advocates, we are against this progression-free survival or overall survival because it's not an indication of the quality of life. It's not an indication of if they are enjoying the life or just staying there. Sometimes it can be selfish for people, I mean for loved ones or caregivers, to try to sustain the patients as long as possible because they are there and breathing, but we don't know how they feel, and that comes to the needs, right? So it's not about prolonging life as opposed to quality of life, how you draw how you draw the lines between them. And actually, if we talk about a critical or sensitive case that is not unsolved by both oncologists and ICU specialists, is the critically ill. Are anyone from the three groups, patients and their loved ones as a group, oncologists, and the ICU specialists, because they are from multidisciplinary, are the three of them well informed about the options when it becomes near end of life? I think, and I hear that all the time from the oncologist side and from the ICU sides and from some patients. Some patients, I think they are taking the lion's share of the pain and misinformation and lack of information about their choices. So in some cases, if it's already the patient reach like the end of life, it's just a matter of weeks. It's a sensitive issue to communicate that to the loved ones, but at the same time, you didn't give them the chance to say goodbye, which basic human rights. But again, how you draw the balance, everyone is different. The problem is we are facing a huge monster called cancer, and it is humanly impossible to have what is now promoted as precision medicine. Precision medicine would mean you treat the whole person, and whole person not only physical sense, emotional, spiritual, and everything, as special and unique and very different than other, and their treatment as such will be different. But it's humanly impossible to treat all these cases in precision medicine. If that what the word means for patient advocate, it means another thing for oncologists, I would argue. But back to your earlier comment about spirituality, again, this is something I was determined to not only in Fadia Survive and Thrive, but in my profession, to develop dedicated modules in self-management and resilience, and also in stress management. We are humans at the end of the day, and if we are not taking care of ourselves, we are not giving the best for us to the world. Whether you are oncologists or patients, we both need to have this self-management and connect to a bigger purpose, the spirituality or purpose in life, that what keeps you going and have this spark in your eyes when you wake up in the morning. This calling can make the will for patients to heal. And I don't like to speak on behalf of their pains, but at Fadia Survive and Thrive, you know our story. Our skin in the game, the honorary president, who is my mom, unfortunately lost her mid-2020. She was a metastatic patient, and we know real time what it means to be a patient or loved ones or caregiver. And so connecting all the dots would help both sides, patients and oncologists. And again, in self-management, resilience, or stress management courses, it's always about grounding, focusing on yourself, focusing on bigger purpose, connecting to a nature, whether beach or park, try to disconnect from any stressor. So these things are considered soft skills or overlooked as secondary to the subject matter, like in your case in the medical or medicine field, and mine in finance field, but they are equally important because it's humanly impossible to have rational thinking and be organized if you are under stress. Stress from the future in the patient case, or stress from relapse in the oncologist case, right? We are all facing the same enemy, which is cancer. Because the amygdala, if it's involved in the fight and flight mood, it's immediately switch off the rational part of the cortex of the brain. So it's just humanly impossible to do that. So that means that we need to take care of ourselves to be able to go about. And I will stop here for the sake of time. Really enjoyed this conversation. Unless there are other questions, we can, I think, accommodate another 3 minutes or 5 minutes.
Okay. If there is any question, you can tell Nigina, Shahmoza. If you have any question, you can just ask. If there is no questions, I think we can finish our today's session. It was very nice to meet you again, and I
Wonderful,
hope we can organize something. So it will be some congress in our country in May. So maybe you
good
can
timing.
join.
Yes,
Yeah.
now we are getting to new normal, so let's hope it will be in person. And thank you everyone for joining. Really enjoyed this conversation, and thanks to you, Dr. Ali Shar. It's always a great pleasure to collaborate.
Bye
Thank you
bye.
all.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.